The Minneapolis City Council has vowed to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. Hey guys, this is Double D from the Entitled Millennials podcast, and this is my Thinking Out Loud series. On Sunday, the Minneapolis City Council vowed to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. So what does this mean? A lot of people, especially on the right, are in a hullabaloo about them, disbanding the police department. Oh, you can't do that. The crime's going to go crazy. Look at all the looting. They're already shorthanded. All that sort of stuff. Clearly, a lot of people are misinformed about what it means to defund or disband the police department. So I suppose a great place to start would be to discuss or try to reach a better understanding of what it means to defund a police department. To defund a police department doesn't mean just completely cut all spending. There's no more police on the streets overnight, getting rid of them completely, shutting down the police departments. That's not what it means. Defunding police is perhaps something of a misnomer. What it actually means is taking funding that's used in the police departments and siphoning it or translating it to more public and social safety programs. Some examples of this would be to take police funding and siphon it instead into housing, into healthcare, into infrastructure, into employment opportunity programs, things like that. So the reasoning behind this is that more than a decade of attempted police reforms have, failed, as we've seen with the case of George Floyd and many others that have been murdered by the hands of police in the last several years. The idea is to transition away from a focus on policing, which is more of a band-aid for the symptoms which cause crime, and to allocate those resources from this police band-aid towards actually solving the problems which result in crime, namely crimes of poverty. So by shifting funding away from policing and trying to solve the issues which cause crime, the hope is to stop crime before it ever happens. And as far as defunding the budget of police departments, let's just say the police have a little wiggle room to lose some money. In the last 4 decades, U.S. police spending has more than quadrupled. It's now at like $115 billion annually. To put that in perspective, the entirety of the Russian military spends about $70 billion each year. Another way to look at this is the fact that for most cities, their budget, something like 50% or over half of it goes to policing. Meanwhile, all the other social services like DHS, infrastructure, transit, healthcare, housing are completely minimalized next to the bloated, militarized, mind you, police budgets. And really, what are we getting from these huge, militarized, bloated police budgets? The truth is, not a whole lot. We're spending $115 billion a year in the United States of America on policing, and some statistics are, for example, 2/3 of rapists still get away with it despite these bloated budgets. In the example of the Minneapolis Police Department, only 56% of cases that have involved a person being murdered or killed end up being cleared. Similarly, with the MPD, only 22% of rape cases get cleared. So we're spending this massive amount of money annually in cities all across the country, and what are we getting for it? Very poor results. And the question is, what is this money going to? Well, as I'm sure many of you can guess, a lot of it is going towards the war on drugs. Programs for undercover cops, controlled buys, raids, and as we've seen with the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protest response by police, a lot of it's going to riot gear and the militarization of police departments all across the country. When it comes to Minneapolis City Council talking about disbanding the police department, what exactly does that mean? What direction is that going to take? The truth is the answers are still up in the air. People in the BLM movement have put forward ideas, but still the city council is not 100% sure. But like I said, one major idea is taking police funding and siphoning it towards programs that will absolve or try to resolve poverty to hopefully reduce the amount of crime that occurs. And then some other ideas are varying responses to varying situations when a dispatch gets a call. Is the call a catastrophic emergency? Is someone in danger of being killed? If not, do we need to have fully armed police showing up at someone's door, kicking it in, waving their gun around? In scenarios where mental health is deemed a factor, one of the ideas that's been proposed is putting forward social service workers and counselors going into a home or going into a scenario and hopefully de-escalating the situation or getting to the root of the problem then and there through mediation. When it comes to drugs and drug-related crime, some activists and members of the city council are talking about, sending in drug counselors, addiction experts to hopefully solve that situation without bringing in the force of a police department. And now we can talk about disbanding the police. The Minneapolis City Council is talking about, like I said, disbanding the MPD. But the reality is, as in the cases of other places like in countries in Europe or even some cities in the United States, the police department ends up getting disbanded, yes, but then it ends up getting rebuilt from the ground up, phasing out officers that have a bad record, doing training that's in a more accountable and more thorough way. So the truth is, while the city council will be moving to disband MPD, chances are there still will be a police department in the future. It's pretty much just like they're hitting the hard reset button. Let's rebuild this from the ground up, make sure we get the right individuals, make sure we have the funding in a way that's not overly bloated, and let's take a look at training our officers in a different way, training them against racism and training them first and foremost in de-escalation and teaching them that deadly force or force in general is a last resort, not the first resort. Now, like I was saying earlier in the video, a lot of people that are hearing about this, especially some on the right, but just everyone all across the spectrum who's kind of uninformed about what this idea of defunding or disbanding the police department means, I wanted to tell you guys and share with you some anecdotal evidence of times that a police department has been disbanded and has actually yielded good results. One of the best examples of a city actually completely disbanding their police department was in a place known as Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey disbanded their police department in 2012 after a long period, several decades of corruption and malevolence from the police department and overspending, which, despite all of that, Camden was still one of the most violent cities in America. So in 2012, the City Council of Camden disbanded their police department and built it from the ground up, starting at scratch. One of the biggest things they focused on was diversification, getting more black and brown officers. They made an initiative where new officers that are patrolling a beat, when they're first hired, they have to go and knock on nearly every door in the neighborhood to introduce themselves. Hey, I'm the new officer, I'm going to be patrolling. And not just that, they would ask individuals, what's the problem? What's the scenario? Where are the drug dealers? What problems do you have in this community? What can I do as an officer who's going to be in your streets daily do to make it better? Since Camden disbanded their police in 2012, it's been 7-8 years now, and they've had a lot of great results from diversification, training and de-escalation, and doing what's called community policing, which is what I just talked about, where the officer goes around and makes himself a part of the community. Since they've done these reforms, since they built their police department from the ground up, violent crime in that city has dropped by 42%. And I think that's a sign that a lot of us can take to heart and have hope that although this may seem radical, let's be real, the violence that's been happening in Minneapolis with the police departments in cities around the country is incredibly radical. And sometimes we have to go back to the drawing board and experiment and try new things to solve a situation. We have to think outside of the box, because clearly reforms and spending more money on police isn't the answer. Camden is a great example of some of the things that we can try to make our communities safer in a way that is less militarized. We can look at Camden and gain a lot of hope from that, and we can learn from their experiences, and hopefully, as in the case of MPD and Minneapolis in general, apply it on a much larger scale. I mean, guys, it's really amazing what's all happened in such a short amount of time from these protests and from this civil unrest. You know, when George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin, I think, a lot of us were angry, upset. Many of us got out in the streets in big cities and small towns all across the country. But those of us who have been doing activism and been involved in politics for a long time, I think we all had a little bit of a line of cynicism in us where, like, well, this isn't the first rodeo. This isn't the first time we've done this. We've been doing this sort of thing since, the 1920s onward. And we've had periods of great results, but in those in-between periods, not a whole lot of change. And, I just think, I believe it was George Floyd's daughter, just the quote of what she said, little girl, she said, my daddy changed the world. And I think that's true, man. Like, after the defeat with the Bernie campaigns and having a lot of our shit shut down and fucking the literal end of days pandemic, I think a lot of us have lost some hope and been disenfranchised and disorganized and just feeling lost. And to see the results of these protests and the civil disobedience and hell, even the riots, let's be honest, they played their role in pushing this thing forward. But just to see how much action is getting done in such a short amount of time, and not just that, but the dialogue that's being had, I mean, guys, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think we're looking at a real future where we can move away from this militarized system of policing that has caused so much pain and suffering in communities all across America. And I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'll be sitting on the edge of my seat watching everything that the City Council of Minneapolis does, and looking at other communities that cut funding and redirect that funding into social programs, man. But I'm rambling here, guys, as always, but this is a victory. It really is. And after 5 fucking years of getting our asses handed to us on every single issue, it makes me incredibly hopeful and happy and motivated that we'll have more victories in the future. So, but anyway, guys, like I said, I'm rambling. Hope I've given you guys something to think about. And keep having this discussion like I'm having with you guys, with your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues. And let's start opening up minds everywhere and anywhere we can to the idea of moving towards a future where, even though this may sound a little bit utopian, maybe we won't need police. Anyway, guys, take it easy. Bye.